Recently I got the urge to listen to the soundtrack of the very first Hitman game, Codename 47 again. If there's a soundtrack that completely outgrew the game it was made for, then Jesper Kud's work definitely belongs in that category. While listening to it, I also got a bit nostalgic, so I fired up the game itself and spent some time with this now 26-year-old relic, and it hasn't exactly aged like fine wine. The graphics are actually kinda charming, the core concept still holds up well, but between the completely unpredictable AI and the complete lack of a save system, it's not exactly what I'd call a pleasant experience. So I played through the Budapest Hotel mission, which for some reason I still know by heart after all these years, and then uninstalled the game. But somehow I was still in the mood for something similar, so I started browsing to my list and well, here we have Death to Spies, aka the Russian Hitman. And if we're doing this, we might as well talk about the entire trilogy, especially since the series is about to get a new entry soon enough. Daragi Tavarishi, it's time for the Death to Spy series. The very first Death to Spies game was released in 2007, developed by the Russian Haggard Games, who have been working on pretty much nothing but this series ever since. As I mentioned before, the shortest possible description would be, it's the Russian Hitman. But if we want to be a bit more specific, we could also call it some weird mashup of Hitman 2, Commandos 2 and Hidden and Dangerous 2. The last comparison is mostly noticeable in the presentation, the setting is World War II and the graphics and environments absolutely scream Eastern European development. Gameplay wise though, this thing is basically Hitman with a more budget coat of paint. The levels tend to be slightly more linear than in Hitman, but they're usually much larger and there's almost always more than one way to get the job done. You can disguise yourself, there's a garrote wire, throwing knives, all the usual good stuff. Also, as weird as this might sound in a third-person game, commando-style view-cone surfing is a huge part of the experience. In other words, you're constantly dancing around green enemy vision cones. Before someone in the comment section comes at me, yes, MoTMod will absolutely be mentioned later, I haven't forgotten about it. And for those who have no clue what that means, don't worry, you'll find out soon enough. Our protagonist is one Semyon Strogov, an agent of the Soviet counterintelligence agency SMERSH. The game is framed as a relatively friendly interrogation taking place in 1951, and the missions themselves are presented as flashbacks from Strogov's past. SMERSH was roughly comparable to something like the CIA, its primary job being rooting out spies, infiltrators and various anti-Soviet elements within the Red Army, among other delightful things of course. SMERSH is actually an abbreviation of Smert Spionam, which means, you'll never guess, Death to Spies. An interesting thing about the cutscenes is that the voice acting in the British release published by Nobilis is actually different from the more widely available American version. At first I wanted to say the British dub is better, but actually it's just different.
You are assigned to kidnap Sturmbannführer Dietrich Meltzer, who had the exact data on the latest SPG Ferdinand. Could you give me the details on this operation?
We knew the exact location of the Sturmbannführer. It was a military base. I was dropped in Square 8, several kilometers away from the designated objective.
You were ordered to kidnap Sturmbannführer Dietrich Meltzer, who held important data on the latest SPG, Ferdinand. Could you describe this operation in detail?
We knew the exact location of the Sturmbannführer. He was stationed at a military base. I was dropped in Square 8, several kilometers away from the objective.
Before each mission you get the usual briefing screen with a map and the objectives. Most of the time it's pretty straightforward. After that comes the equipment selection screen where you get to choose your loadout. I always love the recommended loadout button in games like this. You know, the ones that happily recommend the PPSH and grenades and mines for a stealth mission. Yeah, let's just ignore that. I for one started almost every mission with a suppressed Nagant revolver, garrote wire or chloroform and every knife the game would allow me to carry. And to be fair, you rarely need anything more than that. Not like you could bring much more than that anyway, because your carrying capacity is limited. You can increase it with backpacks, but similar to Hidden and Dangerous 2, wearing a Soviet backpack over a German uniform tends to attract some attention. Sometimes you can take German backpacks too, but outside a few rare exceptions, they're completely unnecessary. From the very first moment though, I gotta admit, the game looks pretty damn good. good in that specific 2007 budget Slav game kind of way. What I said years ago about Czech games applies here too. Somehow, even with lower resolution textures and less flashy visuals, the atmosphere comes through perfectly. In traditional Hitman style, there's us, there's a huge map, and from this point onward how we approach things is largely up to us. Of course, there's some degree of linearity, but for example at the beginning you're not forced to shoot every patrol that crosses your path. You can simply lie down in the grass and avoid them, or more like their vision cones, and then proceed to swear loudly when they somehow spot you anyway. Unfortunately, crouching or walking slowly isn't enough for proper stealth kills. The only thing that works reliably is the dedicated sneaking stance, where our hero moves like a man who just shat his pants. But if you manage to sneak up on a guard this way, you can deal with him using a garrote wire, or in case of civilians, a healthy dose of permanently effective chloroform. Pretty much every uniform in the game can be worn, but especially on higher difficulties you need to be careful, as only soldiers killed with those clean, bloodless methods or with a perfect headshot provide usable disguises. And on the highest difficulty the game doesn't even sugarcoat it, disguises are completely disabled. Supposedly you get access to more suppressed weapons in exchange, but I never really bothered finding out. Once you're wearing a disguise, there are a few more things to keep in mind if you want to sell the act. Don't carry Soviet backpacks or weapons on your back, and don't move like a complete lunatic. Thankfully, this game isn't nearly as sensitive about running as Hitman 2 was, but performing floor gymnastics in an officer's uniform is generally not advisable. Rank hierarchy also matters a lot. If you're disguised as a regular soldier, most other grunts will become slightly suspicious at worst, but higher ranking officers will often see through your bullshit almost immediately, even if you're sitting behind the wheel of a truck. Thankfully, the minimap marks these eagle-eyed elements, so you'll usually know who needs to disappear first, but still, sometimes the system feels way too strict. The funniest thing is that these sharp enemies aren't always higher-ranking officers. Sometimes they're just leading a patrol, and apparently that alone grants them the supernatural ability to identify Soviet spies from 30 meters away simply by looking at the back of their heads. And sometimes they immediately respond by throwing grenades at you. It's a bit excessive if you ask me. The minimap itself, by the way, is ridiculously useful and borderline mandatory. As long as you stick it in a corner and adjust the zoom occasionally, it doesn't become intrusive either. It's a pity it looks so incredibly bare bones. What's funny is that how every single enemy reacts to every single door opening. If you're opening a door in a lonely room and a nearby guard hears it, fair enough. But when I open a door right in front of 6 soldiers and all of them suddenly go, "Oh, was ist los? Was war das?" Geh weiter. And while at the topic of things you'll hear constantly, I absolutely have to discuss the single most common shout in the entire game.
Diversant!
Oh lord, that nasal drawn out "Diversant" is gonna haunt me for the rest of my life. I've heard it way too many times over the years. I also refuse to believe there wasn't a better word available. You've got Spion, which would actually fit perfectly, or Geheimagent, or Maulwurf. But no, what we get is Diversant! One thing that comes in handy is the ability to lure guards away from their positions. Normally you do this with a whistle, but alternatively smoke grenades can also get the job done. You can search down enemies, and you absolutely should. Quite often you'll find keys, documents, or other important items needed to progress. Technically though, most situations can be solved without them. Safes and locked doors can be opened using lockpicks through a surprisingly decent minigame, which of course happens in real time, so yeah, you can absolutely get caught while doing it. If no elegant approaches are working, or you're simply getting sick of waiting around, a quick headshot is always a viable solution. The aiming generally works the way it should, although every now and then you'll have one of those "how the fuck did that miss" moments, especially when it comes to throwing knives. Still, once you get used to it, you can clear entire rooms like some Wild West hero, casually dropping 2 or 3 headshots in rapid succession. The tutorial levels totally scream hidden and dangerous too. There's an obstacle course, a separate shooting range building, grenade practice. Really, the only thing that was missing from here was...
This weather is perfect. Rain and mud. Just the way we like it here. Even your own mother won't recognize you by the time I get through with you.
The first actual mission is fairly straightforward. Your task is to kidnap an officer who's inspecting a nearby military base. First you need to acquire a truck, then drive it into the base, and finally ambush the even unconsciously Hitler-saluting target at one of 3 possible locations and throw him into the back of the vehicle. Yeah, you can drive vehicles in this game as well, although not very often. After that you also need to steal some documents. If you remember to grab the key from the unconscious officer before tossing him into the truck, you won't even need to pick the lock. I haven't even mentioned yet that you can simply knock people out either from the front or from behind. It's the fastest takedown method in the game, but it's absurdly loud, as in people nearby will always hear it, so its usefulness is somewhat limited. Another thing the game doesn't tell you is that when carrying bodies you can actually throw them behind you if you switch to a weapon. It's a bit wonky, but it's incredibly useful when you're trying to hide bodies inside crates or other specific spaces. The second mission isn't just gorgeous and atmospheric, it's also a great example of how multiple approaches are usually possible. You can stick with your excellent camouflage and carefully sneak through the park while avoiding patrols, or you can do basically the same thing on the left side of the map, and quite soon you can acquire an officer's uniform this way. The huge castle mission where you have to rescue a prisoner can be incredibly frustrating on a first playthrough. Those long narrow corridors are absolutely awful. Officers on the far end start getting suspicious immediately, so sometimes the only option is awkwardly hiding behind curtains. You can shoot while leaning out, and to make matters worse, you can't even hide bodies properly here. So when I open the next door, guards immediately discover the corpses of their friends, and yeah, now you have to kill them too. Thankfully ammunition was never a problem. It's never abundant, but always kinda enough. Against single guards I almost always preferred using the throwing knives anyway. All things aside, you'll eventually have to explore the entire castle. Like I said, the objective is to rescue a Soviet agent. To do that, you'll first need the prison warden's uniform, then acquire various authorization papers from officers. One permit allows you to visit the prisoner, another lets you escort him out under the pretense of interrogation. Of course, for this you have to kill the interrogation officer beforehand, then you can escort the prisoner all the way to the exit if you want. If that's too slow, you can knock him out and carry him on your back. Or if you're feeling particularly lazy, you can simply kill him. I mean, technically you can already do that inside his cell as well, so there are many options here. After this comes the hotel mission, and holy shit, the vibes are immaculate. The resemblance to Hitman's Gallard Hotel mission is impossible to ignore. Looking at the bathhouse sections, it couldn't be more apparent. But hey, because of the time period, the whole thing also feels straight out of Mafia. I absolutely love it. The objective here is to secretly identify a diplomat's contact in the library and figure out who's receiving the envelope. The traitor has to die, the diplomat has to stay alive, but you need to swap documents inside his safe. Things get interesting because you're not allowed to bring firearms. Not that you really need them, but the game still insists on making you retrieve the revolver. It's hidden somewhere in the hotel's storage areas, which can only be accessed while disguised as staff, so you could do this as a waiter or a cook. In the kitchen you can even create a distraction in a somewhat convoluted way with these plates. And as for the traitor, you can literally just walk into his room and surprise him. It's an excellent mission, not an original idea by any means, but the execution is solid as fuck. Like the Hitman games, this one also features a rating system. Personally, I couldn't care less about rankings, but I still ended up getting the professional rating most of the time, and occasionally even the game's equivalent of Silent Assassin, the Wolfhound rating. The next gigantic outdoor map has you hunting down 3 officers. The countryside looks absolutely gorgeous, and the sound design elevates it even further. This was the mission where I tried to avoid disguises for as long as possible, and to be frank, it was great. Sure, it required about 8 million quick saves and quick loads, but that's part of the experience. The minimap looks like absolute chaos sometimes. Overlapping vision cones, cleverly timed patrol routes, guards everywhere. It's difficult, but holy shit did it feel good when everything finally worked exactly the way I planned it. In the end, you'll still need an officer's uniform if you don't want to go full Rambo, but that's fair enough. Then comes another completely unexpected shift in scenery. We're inside an Amerikansky underground research facility. The Nazis screaming are replaced by Thompson-wielding US Army soldiers, and instead of assassinations, your objective is secretly photographing blueprints, distracting or knocking out scientists, and doing the usual safe-cracking routine. The rainy Krakow mission takes place in a Nazi officer academy. First you need to reach a tunnel beneath a neighboring building, then eliminate officers and instructors. The atmosphere is fantastic, but this mission leans heavily into disguise juggling, figuring out who can expose whom, what order everything should be done in, and where you're allowed to go. Not a bad mission, just significantly more annoying than most of the others. And then we arrive at 8 snipers. This mission is brutal. You need to sabotage a bridge and eliminate snipers stationed in the surrounding towers. Different sections of the bridge require different disguises, the explosives can only be carried in a backpack, and they have to be planted during tiny 5-second windows when the guards are not looking. It's frustrating. And this was the mission where I finally quit the game. Technically there are only 2 more missions left after this, but trust me, there's a reason I stopped here, and soon enough everything's gonna get a whole lot better. Trust me on this. Despite all the obvious jankiness, I think it's impossible to deny that the game itself has a certain charm. Talking about the visuals or the gameplay, there's definitely something in there. Like every stealth game, the gameplay takes some time getting used to. There are genuinely good ideas and good implementations mixed together with some absolute nonsense. How much you'll enjoy it depends entirely on how tolerant you are of the latter. One thing is certain though, you absolutely can immerse yourself in these levels for hours. And I think the graphics help a lot with that. It definitely has a budget feel, but they're honest about it. Not overloaded with effects, not trying too hard. The character faces look blocky and rough and the animations can be a little stiff, except for the running animation. That one has like a definite carefree morning suburb jog vibe. The crawling and prone movement on the other hand look great. I especially like that you can lean sideways even while lying down. The sound effects are solid too, voice acting aside of course. Weapon sounds aren't particularly varied, but the footsteps, environmental noises and ambient sounds more than make up for it. As for the music, I really don't know. I usually play stealth games without the music specifically so I can enjoy the ambience, though if I remember correctly the menu theme was pretty nice. Death to Spies is a stealth game that feels like a budget World War II Hitman clone most of the time, and the third-person commandos do as well. Seriously, the only things missing is a throwable cigarette pack. The game itself is charming and, yeah, it's janky. But still, I would say don't play the first game, at least not in its current state. But like I said, don't give up on the series just yet. After a surprisingly short wait, the sequel arrived in 2008, Death to Spies: Moment of Truth. Such a short development cycle might sound a little worrying, but fortunately everything turned out just fine. This time around we only get 8 missions instead of the previous 10, supposedly they're based on real historical events and declassified Smerge documents, but right from the start you'll notice a number of small improvements and new additions. The animations, for example, are much better. They feel more lifelike, less stiff, and sneaking no longer looks like having had an anal evacuation. The only thing that slightly hurts the presentation, at least for me, is the strange shaders. The first mission constantly switches between this washed out greenish outdoors and the murky brown indoors, and occasionally the graphics just got fucked whenever I tried tweaking the settings. A nice new distraction mechanic is the ability to throw stones whenever you want, and if you're disguised as an officer you can now order lower ranking soldiers to follow. Probably the biggest one is that the rank hierarchy isn't nearly as unforgiving anymore. Those instant alert red enemies are practically gone. At worst you'll encounter suspicious yellow guards, but even they give you enough time to behave yourself and leave a restricted area instead of immediately tossing a grenade at you. Aside from that, the core gameplay remains exactly what made the first game work. The missions once again take place across huge environments, but this time your objectives are usually more elaborate and interesting. The first mission revolves around prototype jet aircraft. First you have to infiltrate the airbase and gather intelligence on the test pilots, one of whom you'll eventually have to kidnap, that is, knock unconscious and stash somewhere safe. There are optional objectives as well, like hiding away one of the mechanics as well for later, and sometimes entirely new objectives appear unexpectedly through the mission. Your other primary goal is to radio in a commando squad, but to keep them from being detected too early, you'll first need to disable the radar. Even dressed as an officer, you aren't allowed inside it, so instead you can shut off the fuel supply next to it. Then the operators run outside to investigate, giving you roughly 30 seconds to sneak in and switch off the radar, which will stay disabled for 50 minutes in real time. This is when the game tells you that there are anti-aircraft guns that need sabotaging as well. Once again, even officers aren't allowed near them. One of the guns can be sabotaged fairly easily if you're lucky, but the second one is guarded by 3 soldiers. Fortunately, you can find some laxative in one of the nearby buildings, which you drop into the soup while the cook isn't looking, and when all 3 guards race to the toilet, you can use the acid on the cannon. To be fair, you can also call in the commandos first and sabotage the radar and cannons afterward. It works just as well, you simply have about 10 minutes less to finish everything. The second mission takes place inside a secret submarine base, and it's another complex and fun level. Naturally, it turns into mild disguise juggling, but this time a backpack is absolutely essential. I honestly don't remember whether this was possible in the first game, but here you can actually store a second disguise inside your backpack, which is incredibly useful. The base itself consists of an upper and lower section. I recommend starting upstairs where you obtain a safe combination from the captain, which opens the safe in the radio room, which contains the Enigma codebook. You will crawl through ventilation shafts, secretly disable the pump so you can reach the submarine through the drainage tunnels, but before that, of course, you'll also have to steal a pair of bolt cutters to get through a fence. Once you reach the docks, you'll need an entirely different set of disguises. Mechanics can move around freely enough, but to be able to do more, even an ordinary sailor uniform isn't enough. Inside the submarine, you can sabotage torpedoes and retrieve the Enigma machine. This is why you needed the backpack in the first place. Unfortunately, getting back out is where things become a bit complicated. The pumps have long since been turned back on, flooding the tunnel, while the remaining 3 exits all have guards inspecting your backpack. The tedious way is to hide the backpack near the flooded tunnel, retrieve it from the opposite side, and eventually leave through the tunnel once the water is gone. Or you can simply drop one of the torpedoes from inside the control room. This makes every single guard at one of the exits rush over to investigate, allowing you to stroll out without anyone checking your backpack. This mission alone can easily take an hour and a half, but it's totally worth it. The third mission is relatively straightforward and unfortunately not particularly memorable. You infiltrate a small manor house, eliminating an informant and an officer, and that's about it. The disguise system works nicely here and I didn't really run into any major issues. The only slightly annoying part comes right at the end during an optional objective where you have to load 3 crates with painful slowness onto a truck and drive them to your local contact. Loading them while dressed as a worker is perfectly fine, but the intended solution is that you're supposed to steal a driver's uniform, which is somewhere nearby. The next loading screen and the mission itself looks straight out of Hitman Blood Money. It's also a somewhat frustrating mission, at least until you figure out every little detail. This time you're infiltrating an American military base. Your objective is to steal a briefcase without harming its owner, assassinate a scientist, and plant incriminating documents to frame him. Right at the beginning, you can sneak into the basement and shut off the water, luring down a soldier whose uniform will be enough for the rest of the mission. Planting the documents isn't difficult. They can appear in one of 2 different locations, randomly changing every time you restart. The scientist himself isn't hard to eliminate either. You can offer him poisoned cigarettes in the smoking area, although this way his body will eventually be discovered. The better and more shameless solution is simply following him into this office after he unlocks it and ending him there, or just poison his water when he's not there. The briefcase story, however, good lord. An empty briefcase will be put in storage, but you're not allowed to steal it before the cutscene where classified documents are placed inside the diplomat's case. Once the guided tour through the main building begins, you can climb through the storage room window, and this is just jank as fuck. It's painful to watch. So, steal the empty briefcase, throw it out the window, ambush another doctor in the restroom, thus becoming a doctor yourself, then just wait. For like a ridiculously long time. Eventually, after the guided tour ends, Diplomat realizes he doesn't feel great anymore and visits the good doctor. We hand him a lovely sleeping cocktail and swap his briefcase. This mission has a neat concept actually, but anyone who figures all this out without trial and error deserves a standing ovation. The medieval Czech castle mission is one of my favorites. Your objectives are to intercept a coded transmission and plant several explosives. Right at the beginning you can grab a free disguise and cleverly sneak into an otherwise locked warehouse from the back. Inside you will find the backpack and all the TNT you'll need. In the barn you will find info on exactly where those explosives had to be planted. The other multi-story warehouse is guarded as well, but with proper timing you can climb through one of the windows and access it through an underground tunnel. Plant the 2 explosives, quietly clear the conference hall corridor, then simply relax in the adjacent room until the coded transmission arrives. At that point you can eavesdrop through a painting, and that's it. Nothing overly complicated, but the atmosphere is great. The following mission couldn't scream Hitman Blood Money any louder. You're in an American suburb tasked with rescuing an ally who's being held under FBI house arrest while simultaneously faking his death. To do that you first have to enter the house as a police officer, for example. With a bit of trickery you can obtain an FBI disguise and reach your imprisoned buddy, who escapes to the neighboring construction site using a wooden plank. A plank that only survives 3 crossings before snapping. Meanwhile, you also have to transport a fake corpse from near the starting car all the way onto the roof of the target house and finally into one of its rooms. Once your friend escapes, you gotta destroy the room with either a gas cylinder or an explosive briefcase found in a nearby house because, of course, there's one nearby. Then, amid the chaos, you casually jog back to your car. It's an interesting mission, but one that demands an awful lot of luck and improvisation. The final mission takes place in Ukraine, where you're tasked with secretly following 3 Soviet spies. The beginning drags on for quite a while, but the only thing that really matters is that they must never spot you, and for now, neither they nor their assistants can be killed. After what feels like hours and the secret meeting, the 3 little pigs head off toward a nearby village, while their helpers plant explosives on a bridge. You may as well use the officer uniform afterwards, although you hardly need it. The village is populated almost entirely by Soviet soldiers, and only a handful of them will ever become suspicious. Of course, the price of this freedom is that you're forbidden from killing anyone except your actual targets. Each of the 3 spies patrols a different part of the village. Technically, you can simply shoot them if, quote, capturing them becomes impossible. Right. Personally, I chose fist and chloroform 2 out of 3 times because they're quieter than a pistol. This third guy, however, was an absolute nightmare. The only time this fatso is alone is in this barn, where there's also a boat conveniently hanging from above. You cut the rope, boat crashes down. Sounds simple. Except that the moment he notices you, even if you're just standing there, he immediately changes his mind and walks out of the barn. I spent about 20 minutes trying to understand what the developers actually intended here. Shooting the rope or throwing a knife at it doesn't work. The guy is immune to stones, and smoke grenades also only scare him away while causing the nearby villagers to rush inside. A simple headshot works, but then you have to raise a guard running to the radio and transmit the message to end the mission before he activates the alarm. The first time I actually managed that, but the alarm still went off afterwards. God damn it. Mission failed. Fantastic. Eventually I solved it by scaring Chabovsky with a throwing knife, immediately following it up with a headshot. This tiny head start was just enough to reach the radio in time. I gotta admit, I like the mission's overall concept. It was genuinely fun operating more freely than usual but still being constantly surrounded by witnesses. That last solution though, it was pretty nasty. Even though Moment of Truth feels more like an expansion pack rather than a real sequel, I enjoyed it considerably more than the original game. They fixed nearly every major annoyance, the disguise mechanics are much more usable, the AI feels slightly smarter, and the graphics are even prettier, save for the sometimes weird colored shaders. If the original game was like Hitman 2, then Moment of Truth feels like Hitman Blood Money. The missions and objectives are far more varied, although every now and then I found myself missing the simpler, more grounded missions from the first game, only sometimes though, and speaking of which... After seeing all the improvements Moment of Truth brought to the table, it's hard not to think to yourself, man, wouldn't it be great to replay the otherwise excellent missions from the first game, but with the sequel's improved mechanics and better graphics? Well, the good news is that a handful of incredibly dedicated fans had exactly the same idea. The result is Death to Spies MoTMod, or simply MoTMod. At its core, it's exactly what I said. The missions from the first game have been ported into the second game's engine. That alone is already amazing, but there's more. There's an additional MoTMod add-on created and still actively maintained by a British modder known as the Cambridge Spy. The level of dedication here is honestly insane. He's been working on this add-on for well over 10 years. It introduces countless small improvements and fixes, along with more authentic uniforms and a whole range of little details that make the experience even better. Getting MoTMod up and running, however, isn't quite as easy as you'd hope. You'll find a complete installation guide on our Discord server, but the short version is that you'll need both original games, the MoTMod itself, and at least in my case, it only agreed to launch once I installed the add-on as well, so you should probably get that too. After installing the mod, you must create a new profile, and the nice part is that this single profile now lets you play both the first and second game's campaigns. The only downside is that you won't see any cutscenes, instead you get a narrator reading the mission briefings from the first game, which honestly isn't a bad deal. You'll also gain access to a number of new starting weapons, and on certain missions you can even bring equipment that simply wasn't available in the original version. You'll notice changes immediately in the very first mission. For example, those painfully long sneaking sections can now be skipped much faster thanks to a conveniently placed motorbike. Extra equipment is now marked on the map, making it much easier to locate optional disguises without resorting to violence. Enemy positions and even their ranks have occasionally been shuffled around as well, which most of the time make things easier. Every now and then though, it'll completely throw off players who memorize the original game's layouts. Sometimes the changes are downright hilarious. Instead of throwing knives, you can throw an axe, or the elderly women's voices are actually pitch-shifted male voices.
По этому вопросу существует два мнения. Одно неправильное, а другое мое.
The hotel mission also becomes noticeably smoother thanks to the improved disguise detection. The trader in the library behaves much more realistically as well. If you spend too much time blatantly staring at him while he's collecting the envelope, he starts getting suspicious. You can also overhear a conversation between two employees, revealing that the cleaning lady has a key to the trader's room. Another thing I noticed throughout the campaign is that NPCs talk to each other much more often, maybe a little too often.
Any news at the front? We're still winning?
I've had enough of this waiting around.
Yeah. All right. They's on the run. The Russians get them pretty good too. At that, whatchamacallit. Is that you?
The infamous bridge and sniper mission has also been reworked. Enemy placements and unit types have changed, making it a little easier, although I would still call it the second hardest mission in the game. At first I thought I'd gotten incredibly lucky after finding an officer's uniform right away, only to reach the first watchtower and be told that the field police personnel had absolutely no business being in there. Wow. Planting the explosives become considerably easier if you're disguised as the chief engineer, since you're actually allowed to order nearby workers to leave the area. The following mission is one I intentionally skipped during my original playthrough. In my opinion, it's easily the toughest mission in the game. You're infiltrating a full-blown concentration camp in order to rescue a prisoner, and even in the modded version, this mission is the ultimate test of disguise management. Simply getting inside the camp is difficult enough. Prisoners can only be interacted with by two specific classes, the camp doctor or the warden. Even after acquiring one of these disguises, you can only escort a prisoner to a certain point, so escaping the camp itself required an absurd amount of luck. Interestingly though, guards don't give a shit about an escaping prisoner, they only care about you being outside your allowed zone. Compared to that, the final mission is almost laughably simple. You're infiltrating an embassy to assassinate a traitor, once again starting without weapons. First, you have to steal an ID card from the reception, which grants you access to the archives. Using a smoke grenade trick, you lure away the chief archivist and steal his key. Behind this door you'll find weapons and poison, although bringing weapons isn't exactly recommended since the guards aren't shy about patting you down. The neighboring room contains a cook's uniform and a maintenance worker's outfit. I never quite figured out what the handyman disguise was really meant for. The only thing I managed to accomplish with it was entering the women's restroom unbothered and stealing the out of order sign. That sign can then be hung on one of the men's restroom doors. Apparently this was necessary in the original version because the reception desk didn't provide an ID card back then. But then comes the fun part. You simply have to wait for that magical 10-second window where the diplomat from the hotel mission and your target both happen to be absent from the restaurant, the pianist begins playing, and apart from two guards, everyone is distracted. Wait until one guard turns toward the window, you now have a few sketchy seconds to poison the coffee, but if everything goes according to plan, you can slowly stroll downstairs, change clothes if you feel like, relax on the couch, and patiently wait until your target drinks a death press, so congratulations, Wolfhound rating. The best part is that the mod doesn't just improve the first game, it also gives Moment of Truth a visual facelift. Most notably, those ugly shaders disappear entirely, making the sequel resemble the original game's atmosphere much more closely. Don't get me wrong, the shaders weren't that terrible, I just personally prefer the more subtle presentation. My only real complaint about the mod is one small realism feature. Whenever you sprint or crawl, you now hear the character's heartbeat reflecting the physical exertion. Makes sense. The problem is that after about 2 seconds of crawling, you can hear all three of our heroes' hearts beating like crazy. This became irritating very quickly. At this point, I don't think anyone needs convincing, there's really no reason to play the vanilla version anymore. MoTMod is simply the definitive way to experience the first game. If you've never played it before, skip the original entirely and start with this one. The visuals are better, the gameplay is better, it's simply a superior experience. The second game is perfectly enjoyable on its own, but if the mod already exists, why wouldn't you use it? It certainly doesn't make anything worse. God bless the developers and especially Cambridge Spy for continuing to support this project after all these years. This is finally one of those rare mods that genuinely improves the original game in every meaningful way. The third game took quite a bit longer to arrive. After a quick math, it means it finally released in 2016. Originally it was supposed to be called Ghost of Moscow Death to Spies, but eventually released as Alekhine's Gun. Officially it's pronounced as Alekhine, but I'm just gonna call it Alekhine because the real-life Alekhine's Gun is actually a famous chess formation named after Alexander Alekhine. It kinda means placing 2 rooks in front of the queen. I don't play chess, so I have no idea how devastating that actually is, but if the first 2 games were copies of Hitman 2 and Hitman Blood Money, then Alekhine's Gun is basically the low-budget version of Hitman Absolution. The story is told through, no, I'm not calling them comic book style cutscenes again, I've said it way too many times already. Let's just say they're presented this way because it was cheaper. The game opens up with a delightful suicide followed by another series of flashbacks, and the adventure begins with one of the game's 2 World War II missions. One thing that immediately breaks the illusion for me is our hero's brand new, extremely thick Russian accent.
Good evening, sir. Good evening. Reservation for Gunther Tenenbaum, please. Of course. Just a minute.
It is authentic, true, but for someone who's supposed to be secretly operating in America, it's kinda too obvious. One mission even points it out directly.
I need access to some evidence. I don't remember the number, but I can look if you're busy.
Oh no, I'm fine. Where's your authorization form? Are you from Greenwich Village, Tribeca? I can't figure out your accent.
Oh, I'm from Texas.
The mission briefing and the overall UI are straight from Hitman Absolution, but thankfully we still get to choose our own starting equipment. The new addition is a progression system. Completing mission awards points that can be spent unlocking or upgrading weapons. Thanks to this, you can't even bring a suppressed pistol on the very first mission. Later on you can unlock several of them though, but you'll see it's largely unnecessary. Just like in the previous games, the most valuable tools remain the garrote, chloroform and throwing knives. The first thing you'll probably notice is the presentation. Everything suddenly feels very console-like. I mean, the controls. That's not necessarily a bad thing, most people are probably more comfortable with this style anyway. The animations are perfectly fine, but the whole thing has a slightly plasticky feel to it. At least after spending so much time with the first two games, it felt really strange to me. Graphically, there's one thing I need to get out of the way immediately. For some reason, our hero has this weird glowing outline around him. I really have no idea why. The other issue is that this game is absurdly dark. Eventually I had to raise the gamma because I simply couldn't see anything anymore. And here's the weird part, lowering the gamma somehow made the picture brighter. I have zero idea how they managed that.
This sucks.
This lighting annoyed me the most during the outdoor sections of the very first mission where pitch black shadows collide with almost completely overexposed bright areas. It reminded me of those old City Interactive Jupiter Engine games. Not a good memory. But anyways, back to the game. The indispensable minimap from the previous games is gone. Instead we got the regular map showing enemy positions, while a new instinct mode borrowed straight from Hitman Absolution temporarily overlays a minimap and highlights nearby enemies. It has its uses. For example, while wearing disguises you can instantly see who's going to become suspicious. Of course the use of instinct mode is limited, but it will recharge after a while. There's also a basic cover system, sneaking speed feels fine. Most of the time you can even sprint behind enemies without being noticed. Both the garrote and knife kills have entirely new animations which look great, apart from those annoying white flashes every time the camera switches. Thankfully those can be skipped with a right click. Of course we still have throwing knives, you can fight with your fist, you can silently subdue enemies with your bare hands. I mean, sometimes we'll get back to that. The fist fighting mechanic mainly exists for situations where you don't want civilians to die. Not that you would get any repercussions for that, in fact the game almost encourages lethal solutions this time around. Chloroform can only be used twice instead of 5 times, and as far as I know it can't even be upgraded. So if you need a civilian's keycard but don't want to waste chloroform, just punch them and pray you get the animation where you simply knock them unconscious, instead of the one where your character casually snaps their neck. Thankfully quick saving still exists, so maybe I shouldn't be complaining too much, even more so because this only matters if you're aiming for maximum score and the silent assassin rating, but for that you'll need more than just determination. The rapid fire headshot tactic from the previous games doesn't just work here, it's downright overpowered. If you activate instinct while aiming, your character basically gains an aimbot. I'm not even joking. Every encounter suddenly becomes trivial this way. The only downside is ammunition. By default you can only carry a single magazine for suppressed weapons, with upgrades maybe 2, but that's it. Lockpicking and safecracking both return. This time they're considerably more polished. During lockpicking you can actually see the next pin, making the whole process much smoother. And if you're in a hurry, instinct can even identify one correct pin automatically. Safes work a little differently, but they're just as straightforward. On top of that, there's a small memory minigame whenever you tamper with electrical equipment, which is fine, but honestly the game would have survived perfectly well without it. And of course, since this is basically Absolution, you can now hide bodies inside closets as well. So, what about the enemy AI? Well, not much has changed. If you play the previous two games, you'll feel right at home. Whistling still works. There's also a placeable radio that acts as a distraction, although it's a little more elaborate than before. Thankfully NPCs no longer react to every single time someone opens a door. If you walk too close, however, they will definitely get jumpy. The disguise system also feels somewhat simplified. The hierarchy is easier to understand and to exploit, and suspicious guards are way less aggressive than before. Most of the time they only become hostile if you enter restricted areas. Even then, first they usually explain what's wrong, like you're missing an access card or only big dick boys are allowed in here. One thing I didn't like though is that the moment you obtain the required keycard or document, they don't even check you anymore, they can see right in your inventory. This definitely broke the immersion a little. Another problem that's not tied to this game specifically but to the whole stealth genre as a whole, guards never recognize your face, only your clothes. First the policeman refuses to let you enter wearing civilian clothing, half a minute later you're dressed as a hotel boy and suddenly everything is perfectly fine. Or the classic, sorry, only officers are allowed in here. Hold on, let me change it to my officer's uniform. This joke will never stop being funny. That's basically the gameplay in a nutshell. Now let's talk about the missions themselves because as much as it pains me to say it, Alekhine's gun's biggest weakness lies in its level design. The very first mission that has an optional tutorial takes place in a Norwegian Nazi castle where you have to eliminate both an officer and a doctor. It's always worth checking the medical rooms because more often than not you'll find sleeping pills, laxatives or some kind of poison that can be used somewhere later in the level. Instinct mode is also genuinely useful whenever you're trying to locate important documents that the game insists on hiding in the most obscure places imaginable. Down in the prison, we meet an American spy who eventually becomes our partner throughout the story. This cutscene is an absolute audio nightmare. The voice actor sounds like he's got an XLR cable stuck up his ass. Sometimes it sounds like people were casually walking around in the recording booth. Crazy.
You're the Russian. The one no one talks about. I'm kidding. I was told the Russians were interested in Heinrich. Look, maybe we can work something out.
Looks like you're the only one who needs help here.
To hell with this. I have something you'll want. You just let me out of here.
Be more specific.
Documents. Heinrich was working on the serum. It's all in the folder. Formulas, reports of the tests they were working on.
Hurry up.
The second mission is brutal. Not because it's difficult or frustrating, simply because of the concept itself. This is the Swiss Magnate Hotel, which basically is a hybrid of the Gallard Hotel mission from the original Hitman and the hotel mission from the first Death to Spies, or more like their carbon copy. Just like Gallard Hotel, you sneak into the target's room through the neighboring balcony, only this time you'll have to do it at least twice. Just like Gallard Hotel, you steal the master key conveniently left behind by the cleaning lady. And just like the first Death to Spies hotel mission, you have to identify a spy inside the library, eliminate him, steal the documents from the other target while keeping him alive, after doing some eavesdropping first. What I loved here the most was trying to figure out when exactly the game allows me to perform a silent barehanded takedown from behind. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. In the end, I had no choice but to save one chloroform charge specifically for him. The next mission is also the game's second and final World War II level. Despite how atmospheric it looks on the surface, an Austrian fire station turned into Nazi headquarters, the underground laboratory is basically lifted straight from the American research base from the first Death to Spies. The same scientists working in the middle, same corridors, same rooms, very familiar. After that we visit Chinatown for a bathhouse mission involving 2 targets. Strong Codename 47 vibes here, but at least visually it's fantastic. Like I said earlier, headshots are ridiculously effective, so one target literally took this much effort. And here's the second one. Don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining that the mechanics are less janky than before. It's not even about the headshots themselves, it's just that somehow the game makes reaching those situations far too easy. You'll see even more examples of this soon. Then comes a biker gang mission somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Texas. Finally something fresh, and the environment looks great as well. Obviously, you can stroll into a biker bar wearing a suit, but there are several ways inside, like a mechanic disguise or a gang uniform. The objectives aren't complicated either. The guitarist can be flattened by sabotaging his amplifier and dropping a cage onto his head. The gang leader simply needs to be knocked unconscious and dragged to the getaway vehicle, which can be tough until you realize that you can open a nearby window and literally throw the boss outside. How elegant. This was probably the most original and enjoyable mission in the game so far. This Mafia boss mission though is complete ass. Everything starts with guards being ridiculously suspicious even if you're wearing the correct uniform. Half the time the easiest solution is simply stabbing everyone nearby so you can disable the alarm. Getting to the safe isn't particularly difficult, the real problem is that the level 100 Mafia boss is upstairs. Neither indoor nor outdoor guard disguises are accepted here. Eventually the guards talk about that damn cook because the boss is hungry. Okay, so this is classic Hitman. Find a cook disguise, grab some food, mix in the sleeping pills I just found. Perfect. Except there isn't a single piece of food you can actually pick up. 3 plates of food here, even a giant lobster. Nope, because you don't actually need food. Simply wearing the cook uniform magically grants you access. Naturally the guards will frisk you first, but hey, having a kitchen knife as a cook would obviously be suspicious. But a throwing knife and a suppressed Walther pistol? Come on. It's just so incredibly silly that after throwing every weapon onto the floor directly in front of the guard, he happily lets me in. The boss also couldn't give less fucks that I walked inside, he's just chilling and painting. Eliminating him is easy peasy. As it turns out, the sleeping pills were actually meant for the second target. Mix them into his cocktail and he interrupts his daily routine to go take a nap. At least that's what I expected. Instead, he suddenly dies. Okay, fair enough. This is probably the weakest mission in the entire game. It somehow manages to feel both completely effortless and strangely frustrating at the same time. Then come the jungle missions. Sometimes they reminded me of Splinter Cell, other times they feel like Far Cry 1 because of this shirt. Yeah, bright red shirt combined with white trousers is obviously perfect camouflage inside the green jungle. Good job, comrade! These jungle missions honestly disappointed me the most. Not because they're dark or downright terrible, they are far too easy. Especially after spending half the game mastering the mechanics. I don't mean they become easier because I improved, I mean they're genuinely child's play. The game could have started with these missions and nobody would have noticed. Because once you obtain a basic disguise, you can casually stroll through enormous enemy camps, reaching the target building, eliminate everyone inside and go home. Not much planning or distraction needed, just walking, bang bang and leave. There's also an aircraft carrier mission which actually looks really nice and the objective is interesting too. You have to quietly eliminate Cuban saboteurs who infiltrated the ship and prevent them from carrying out their sabotage. Of course, this requires quietly killing a few innocent American sailors as collateral damage, but better this than losing a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier, right? I didn't really discuss the story because, honestly, it's not really remarkable. Not that the previous games were masterpieces either, but here we have the usual betrayal, suspicion, murders, double-crossing. So near the end we end up imprisoned, recover our confiscated equipment from the evidence room and finally kidnap the traitor. Despite its simplicity, this prison mission actually looks great and has a nice atmosphere. The final mission though also feels strangely condensed. It takes place inside a secret American bunker where you have to eliminate a high-ranking officer along with the mysterious mastermind behind the entire conspiracy. Steal a doctor's disguise, inject the captain with sleeping pills instead of a vaccine, clear the infirmary, spike the boss's donuts, ambush him inside the restroom, voila. But the so-called final boss is so weird. At first we supposedly don't know his identity, only that he speaks with a slight German accent. Cool, so we gotta do some investigating, right? Nope, just open the map, it immediately tells you exactly where he is. Turns out the mastermind is basically Walter White, there's a beef struggle during the cutscene, then you simply kill him. That's it. Anticlimactic. As a final mission, it's just as straightforward and underwhelming as several earlier missions. I don't know, maybe I simply played Alekhine's gun too soon after finishing the previous games, maybe I just appreciated the grittier approach despite all the flaws, but overall, this game feels weird. Purely in terms of mechanics, it's undeniably more user-friendly, much of the frustration has been ironed out, everything is streamlined, simplified, and way easier. But the price for this convenience is depth. I'm not saying the first two games were immersive because of their janky AI, but Alekhine's gun somehow feels superficial. That's probably the best word for it. There are still multiple ways to reach your objectives, although not that many, and most of the time the most direct solution works perfectly well. As I mentioned before, many missions simply let you grab a basic disguise, stroll straight to the objective or obtain whatever item you need with minimal effort. Variety isn't exactly the game's strongest suit either regarding objectives or locations. There are maybe 2 missions I genuinely call memorable, the rest either recycle previous ideas or simply boil down to killing 2 people and calling it a day. The graphics are obviously more modern than before, personally though they felt far too plastic. The lighting, the permanently glowing protagonist, the excessive darkness, most levels eventually blur together into one giant black, grey and dark blue mixture. The audio also feels noticeably cheaper. I mean, it's roughly the same quality as the previous games, but now, with modern visuals, it stands out much more. And to make matters worse, the game also crashed regularly, something that almost never happened in the previous titles. Surprisingly, Alekhine's gun also received an enhancement add-on, once again created by Cambridge Spy. Unlike MoTMod, this one mostly focuses on small improvements, unused character models, minor audio tweaks. Then there's the Sam's mod, which mainly adds new pickups, weapons, and slightly adjusts guard equipment. Nothing revolutionary, certainly not enough to make me replay the whole game. The same goes for the fan-made mission pack, it simply didn't excite me after finishing the campaign. It's honestly a shame, Alekhine's gun probably ended up with the most unfortunate fate of the entire series. It's not a bad game, it just doesn't have anything particularly memorable or outstanding. It's one of those solid 6.5 or 7 out of 10 games. The kind of title you would find in a bargain bin years later and think like, you know, it's not even too bad. Having played the first 2 games though, it's impossible not to notice how much this one sticks out. A perfect example that prettier graphics don't automatically translate into a better game. Even so, it's probably worth playing through once. Like I said, it's not bad, it's just a little too average, and inevitably disappointing after what came before. Originally, the developers planned 3 playable characters. Old Semyon would have remained the disguise and stealth specialist, Olga would have served as a femme fatale distracting guards, and Viktor would have handled explosives and long-range sniping. Eventually, the roster shrank to just Semyon and Olga, but even that proved too expensive to develop, so in the end we got the version you've just seen. It really is a shame, it could have been a bigger, more action-oriented version of the plan, but unfortunately money talks. And fortunately, Haggard Games didn't give up after the 3rd installment. Over the past few years, they've posted development updates for what was originally known as Death to Spies Red Wolf. Just recently, at the end of May, the first proper trailer finally appeared, and the game is now called Smersh Wolfhound. It's currently planned for the 2nd quarter of 2027 and returns the series to its World War II roots. My first impression was that it looks like someone mixed Moment of Truth, Enemy Front and Sniper Elite into one game. We'll find out next year whether that combination actually works. Either way, I have nothing but respect for the developers. For such a small studio, their dedication to this series is genuinely admirable. I'm rooting for the 4th game, it for sure will be much better than the 3rd one. Én ismét Lali voltam, köszönöm a megtisztelő figyelmet és nagylelkű támogatást, legyetek jók, szevasztok!